Everyone, let's wrap up November. November was very good reading-wise for me. I read 12 things that I finished and we need to talk about. I uploaded 2 reading blogs where I talked about some of the books already, but I'll link those videos below. I also uploaded a letter to November, and November has been rather tricky in an overall sense of the way things are going. But November's always hard, and now this week the seasonal affective disorder kicked in and I've been so stressed that I've been snapping at people all week. So happily I have the day off. But I've noticed putting together the books that I read that I want to talk about that I am struggling putting words together. So I'm already sorry that I'm so ineloquent and coherent or lacking coherency that I hope you can follow what these books are about and what I think about them. Let's go and start with the physical books. I can't even come up with a proper order for putting these books together. Anyways, the first one, Dead Romantics, is unusual for me. You know, I don't normally go for romance books because mostly I don't like the tropes that are used in romance books. I like watching romance and rom-com, but I don't like reading about it. But this one was, I don't know, I need a happy book to read something and the cover is nice book. So I bought it not knowing what it's about, or I immediately forgot what it was about after I heard someone talk about it and enjoying it. And I was pleasantly surprised that this is not only romance. I like my romance to be side plot or not at the center of the story. The center of this story is a young woman who is the ghostwriter to a very popular romance writer. And she's struggling to finish her last book that she had a contract for or something. And mostly because she doesn't believe in happily ever after in love anymore. She's got her heart broken and is all not happy. So that's our main character and our narrator. There is a side effect to her being able to see ghosts, and she shared that with her father, which is the main plot or the main part of the story, the funeral of the father. The father passed away, and so she needs to go home, a place she hasn't been in years because she's been mocked for seeing ghosts and bullied and had a really horrible childhood in that village, and now she's back for the funeral, and there's siblings and family issues, there's town issues, and then there is her editor, the love interest, who somehow appears as a ghost as well. Did I spoil that? Is that on the back? No, it's said on the back. The editor is dead. I really enjoyed a lot of the parts of this book. I enjoyed the village life, I enjoyed the dealing with grief and the funeral parts, and also the banter between the narrator and the dead editor and everything that is going on. Granted, it's not a story that is surprisingly new, but you don't need to have that for having a nice, entertaining, fluffy story. What I must say I didn't like, or rather a trope I don't like in romance in general, is how the main character's always talking down on herself and making herself bad. There's a word for it, I can't think of it right now. But that is something that is often in romance tropes or romance characters that I've read so far, that they lack confidence and they really beat down on themselves a lot. And in this character, there's no need for that. But it's part of her personality. And so that's the part that I particularly didn't enjoy. I must say, if you don't like the magical realism or fantasy element of seeing ghosts and ghosts being part of your life, and the other element of grief is not something you want to read about, or losing a parent, then I would not recommend this. Otherwise, I thought it was a very fluffy, nice read. Happy Hour, on the other side, I don't really know what to think of until now still. I read it because I bought it just on a whim as well. I needed books this month, let's be honest. And I didn't expect to get the party insight or following a 20-something young woman around New York, the party scene for a summer. It was well written. It is a nice insight into what it means to be a young woman in the world in general, but especially going out in New York, and how to pay for things and the prices and the differences in what kind of money people have and how women are treated and how women are respected. All of that is rather nice. But for some reason, I feel either I'm too old or I read the book from a different perspective or a wrong point of view for me to really properly enjoy it. Most of it felt rather tedious and boring and repetitive. But overall, it's just a quick read, and it was very interesting for what it does about representing how young women live life or are treated by life in general. That's a little bit too general. I think I managed to put that in better words in my reading blog. Following the trend of I didn't really get this is the last physical book I read, and that is Ghost Music. I really like the writing. I also like the story of this young woman in a marriage. They move house in the beginning to make room for the mother-in-law, and then there's things happening in the relationship where you kind of get the feeling that the wife doesn't know her husband really well, that there is tension between the mother-in-law and the wife, that there is a wish for a grandchild and a child by the women, but the husband really doesn't want to. And there are a lot of things that you feel are not said and are not spoken about. And things escalate. The wife is a pianist, and she stopped being a concert pianist sometime at the end of her university. Sometimes at the end of her university, and is now just teaching playing piano. And all of that is super interesting and well done. But there's also another element. You could say ghost-like. I'm not really sure if that is a ghost or not, but there is this pianist who disappeared years ago and that she somehow gets in contact with and has a friendship or something. And then we get to the point where I didn't really get things. And I'm totally blaming my brain and the situation I'm in right now, not the book. I think the book put everything there. I just failed to grasp it. And I'm really angry at myself for reading this now in this state of mind that I'm in, where I need more mind space and mind frame to really get the best out of the book. But I highly enjoyed it and I highly recommend it, and I'm going to reread it hopefully one day. Now let's look at ebooks. I finished Elantris this month. I started by finishing it. I started last month and then finished it in November. And this was the huge Brandon Sanderson tryout novel for me, where I wanted to see if I actually enjoy his writing. And I was surprised how much I enjoyed the book. Elantris is a story of a city or a world where this place, Elantris, was a city of gods, where people got struck with something and then they were turned into godlike creatures who could use magic. But then something happened and the godlike creatures, or the transformation, didn't turn people into gods anymore, but into sort of, let's call them zombies. They're more dead than alive, but they don't have any powers anymore. So the living people decided to just lock them up in their own town, and the neighboring towns are still there. There's also an element of a religious takeover or a fanatic sect that is trying to get everyone in this world to follow their god and really follow their doctrine and everything. So we follow different perspectives of narration. We follow one prince who turned Elantrian in the beginning and was locked into this Elantris place. We follow the princess who was on the way to get married to the prince, but then he said now she's a widower, still married to the prince, and finding the city a little bit in turmoil and not quite well organized. And then there is this priest who wants to overthrow this country that the story is set in. And it's very interesting in this idea of how fanatics and religious planning and political games are played. It's also a very interesting take on society and on how the people live in Elantris and build societies, and many more things that I can't remember, sadly. So overall, I really, really enjoyed the book and enjoyed the writing and enjoyed the characters. I can recommend Brandon Sanderson now. Currently reading The Final Empire and also enjoying it. I didn't know it was a heist book. It feels like a heist book. Anyways, more about that next month. Another interesting novella I read this month was The Gurkha and the Lord of Tuesday. This is a 100-page book jam-packed in the future about a city that is ruled by an AI, and we're following a genie who woke up after thousands of years of sleep and is really confused by how the world is working now and is trying to spread chaos and fun, and is sort of used by a grumpy old man who really doesn't like where things went in the society when the AI took over. There's a lot of aspects you can really deep dive into that I also couldn't really grasp this month completely. But there's a lot of talk about how the world is polluted and the air is polluted and nanobites are everywhere, that humans are needed to really keep things going and the air breathable, and there's a balance needed to make everything work, and how the AI does it, how the society is organized, and how many flaws the society still has, despite sounding like everybody is good, everybody is cared for. I really enjoyed this book, and I can highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in some ideas on how different societies could go in the future. The last 3 books I read were all written by the same author, and I thought about them differently. I started reading The Siren Queen a month ago, and then I put it aside because I never could get into it. So this month I finished it, and I must say, I don't really know what it wanted to tell me. It's following the story of a young Chinese American girl that somehow got involved with the moving pictures and the theater and becomes an actress. The whole book is set up like a memoir, talking about how she got there and how she got famous and things like that. But everything is also intertwined with fairy lore or fae that are basically running the movie business. And I'm honestly confused. I don't know what the book wanted to tell me. There's a lot of beautiful writing in there, and I am not quite sure what the message was. And at some point I found myself thinking, why am I reading a fake memoir by a person I don't know, if I could just read real memoirs? And the fantasy aspect also didn't play off in a way that I think it was rewarding or getting anything out of it. There's also lesbian representation because the main actress has relationships with women and how that is looked at and understood. But also that, I'm not sure what it wanted to tell me, which is sad because the novella Into the Riverlands by the author is the 3rd book in the Singing Hills cycle, where we follow the cleric Chi and learn more about stories that are happening in a different part of the world that they live in. And it's fascinating how that looks at how we tell stories, about whom we tell stories, and what kind of stories we tell, and how distorted they can become towards reality or in representing reality. Especially the Singing Hills are an archive of stories of the area. So I really enjoyed that. And the short story, What the Dead Know, was also very fascinating, even though I forgot all the content now. But it was really fun reading it, and it was just 30 pages and really interesting. And I really like Nghi Vo's writing, and I like how she manages to always put some fantasy elements in her stories while still feeling that the setting is in reality. It's not complete fantasy. It's a mix of things. I really like how she does that. I'm always amazed at the characters she creates, at the world she creates, at the stories she tells. But I feel with everything I've read by her now that her short form is much, much stronger than her long form. So go read the novellas first, I think, and then give the books a try if you want to read more of her. But I must say, I didn't enjoy the books as much as the novellas and the one short story I read. And that takes us to audiobooks. I listen to quite a bit. Let's start with the shortest. I listened to Der Totengräber. I think it's The Undertaker in English. It's just 25 minutes, the story of an undertaker coming to town shortly before the plague comes to town, and then the events evolving or unfolding. There is a friendship between a young girl and the undertaker and how things happen there. 25 minutes, not much to do, but I really, really enjoyed it, and it was well done. I listened to it in German, of course. The only other fiction book I read was the first book in the case of The Damaged Detective, which is a series of books, apparently, where we have a young man who got infected by some drug. there are people trying drugs out that could enhance people's minds and capabilities. So we find this little idiot most of the time being very, very capable and smart for a short amount of time. And the whole book is mostly a road trip of transporting the 5-minute detective or the damage detective. He calls himself an ancestor of Sherlock Holmes. So they take him from one facility to another and the adventures they have. We follow him and his bodyguard and the relationship that's evolving between them, the thoughts they have, and a little bit of the history. It's more of a fun adventure story with some interesting ideas about how the brain can be manipulated and how politics or societies would use that and the possibilities there. Mostly it's fun. It was entertaining. I really enjoyed it. Not sure if I'm going to continue soon with the series, but it was a good audiobook to listen to. Then I listened to quite a lot of nonfiction, mostly because I couldn't focus. And my iPod is still broken, so I can't listen to music while I'm out walking. And I just used quite some nonfiction as background chatter, which is probably not the best way to do, but self-improvement nonfiction is very good for that because I don't really expect to get much out of it that is new at the moment, but more sort of reminders and ideas of what to change or what to pick up again. And Essentialism was definitely one for that because it didn't really feel new to me. I think it was more new when it was written in 2011, but now in 2022, after having read a lot of self-improvement books and consumed a lot on the content of these ideas, essentialism, minimalism, decluttering, and just simplifying life, I didn't really learn many new things, but I still enjoyed the audiobook for the stories. The narration was well done. And I think if you're new to the topic, this is a good entryway to get into the idea of essentialism and minimalism and all the productivity things that are happening. The same goes for the last book I listened to. Someday is not a day in the week. I couldn't focus on my audiobook, so I looked for something and this just stood out. The audiobook started off a little bit meh for me. I wasn't really expecting to get anything new out of it. I didn't really know what to expect in general. I hadn't heard anyone talk about it, and the essence of the book is giving you tips on how to get started on your projects and on your ideas, your someday projects, because putting them off will not be helpful. And there are also ideas on figuring out what you actually want in your life. So that was a surprise benefit because I am struggling to find out what I want to do with 2023, with what I want to do with myself, where I'm going to put myself. So there were quite a few quizzes that you could do and probably download things for that, which I still haven't done. I mostly did the quizzes and answers in my head while I was listening. And it was surprising results. So I thought that was nice. And I also thought a lot of the ideas were nice. For me personally, I must say that a lot of those things come naturally to me. I'm not one for putting off things. So I don't have a someday project, which I sometimes feel is a bad thing because if your wish list is empty, what do you want to do? And if you don't have a someday I want to do this, or your bucket list basically only contains kick the bucket, then there's not much to do anymore. And it's just floating through life, which is nice and could be worse. But in the overall theme or benefit of the book, I didn't really experience that, but I can see how this could be useful tips and ideas for people who feel that they never do what they want to do, or that they never find the time to do the things they want to do, or that they have these huge someday projects that they keep putting off for later. So for that, I thought it was a very good audiobook. I also must admit this thing was so slowly read that I kept speeding it up and I ended listening to it on twice the speed, which I normally don't do. So that's also an indicator of background chatter for me. But I enjoyed it. It was very nice and interesting. And that were all the books. I've decided to steer away from character-driven and theme-driven books for a while and taking more time to go for plot-driven books, as it's much easier for me to focus on them, which is an exaggeration for having read every sentence in The Final Empire at least 3 times by now. So I am really struggling with focus and reading, but I will keep going because what else am I going to do? I like reading and I want to read and I want to read the books. I think the battery just died. How much was I talking? I hope you had a wonderful November with some great reads and you have some great plans for December to close up the year. I have some exciting plans I want to do, not really sure how to put them. The focus is really a problem right now. But anyways, I'll talk to you soon about whatever happens next, and will definitely let me know what your plans are for December and what you've read in November. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.